Welcome to History Date Night, a World War II podcast covering the Second World War in chronological order, from the opening shots to final victory. I'm Justin, and joining me is my wife and co-host, Jenny. Together we explore the people, battles, and turning points that shape the deadliest conflict in human history, one date at a time. On this episode, the blast kills every man inside.
The logic is clear enough.
Conventional military thinking considers impossible. Welcome back to History Date Night. I'm Justin. Last episode, we left the Mannerheim line still holding, barely, under up to 400 shells falling per minute, with Timoshenko's rebuilt Red Army pounding it day after day. This episode, February 11th through the 16th, is the week that the Mannerheim line is breached. Finland begins seeking peace, and a Royal Navy destroyer enters a Norwegian fort with fixed bayonets and cutlasses, actual swords, to bring 299 men home.
I'm Jenny. This week also has Germany handing over extensive naval technical information and design data to the Soviet Union in exchange for oil. An Enigma rotor recovered from a sinking submarine and rushed to Bletchley Park. Rommel getting his first Panzer Division. Guderian deciding the Ardennes plan will work. And the author of the 39 Steps dying in Montreal. As usual, history happens everywhere simultaneously. Let's get into it.
February 11th in Berlin. The German-Soviet commercial agreement is formally signed. We've been watching the economic relationship between Germany and the Soviet Union since the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact in August. They signed a non-aggression pact and a secret protocol dividing Eastern Europe, and since then the two countries have been trading steadily. This new agreement formalizes and expands that trade. The Soviets will supply raw materials, oil, grain, manganese, chromium, timber, phosphates. Germany will supply manufactured goods like machinery, industrial equipment, and weapons.
Germany is supplying the Soviet Union with extensive naval technical information and design data, along with the unfinished heavy cruiser Lutzow, a Deutschland-class vessel that was never completed for Germany. The Soviets get an unfinished heavy cruiser and the technical knowledge that comes with it. Germany is, in effect, handing over sophisticated military technology to a country it is planning to invade within roughly 18 months. Hitler justifies this to himself and his advisors as buying time, keeping the Soviets neutral while he defeats France and Britain in the West. The logic is clear enough, and the irony is also.
The Soviet side of the bargain matters enormously for Germany's ability to keep fighting. Britain's naval blockade has been cutting off German imports since September. German industry is running short of oil, rubber, and key metals. The Soviet trade deal provides a backdoor through the blockade. Raw materials from the Soviet Union's vast interior that British warships cannot intercept. Without Soviet oil and food deliveries, Germany's war economy faces serious constraints by mid-1940. The Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact is not just a diplomatic arrangement. It is the economic lifeline that makes the German Western offensive possible. On February 11th in the Karelian Isthmus, after 10 days of one of the heaviest bombardments in military history up to this point, Timoshenko opens his main assault at noon, Leningrad time. The focus is not on the Suma sector that the Finns have been defending for 70 days, and which is now the most heavily fortified point on the entire line, but that's the point. The main thrust instead comes at the Lada sector, slightly to the east. A breakthrough there flanks Suma from behind and makes it untenable, forcing the Finns to abandon it without the Soviets having to storm it directly.
The assault on the Papias bunker, one of the Mannerheim line's strongest fortified positions, begins with a 2.5-hour artillery barrage, then infantry. The first attack on Papias fails. Fresh Soviet battalions go in. Then, Soviet tanks drive up and park directly in front of the bunker's firing ports. In the early days of the war, this would have been suicidal. Finnish Molotov cocktails and Borov's anti-tank guns would have knocked them out. But by February 11th, there are effectively no anti-tank guns left in the sector. They've been destroyed in the previous 10 days of shelling. And the Soviet infantry armor coordination has been practiced on the full-scale replica of the Mannerheim line that Timoshenko built behind Soviet lines. Each tank is covered by soldiers with automatic weapons who prevent Finnish infantry from getting close enough to throw cocktails. The Finns have no choice but to flee the bunker and fight from the earthworks around it. At 12:30, a red banner rises above the Papias bunker.
The fighting continues all night at the $1 Million Bunker, named by Finnish soldiers for what it cost to build, on the right flank of the position. Defenders hold even when the bunker is surrounded, even when Soviet soldiers climb in through the firing holes and are killed inside. At 5 a.m. on February 12th, Soviet sappers managed to place a 230-kilogram block of TNT against a shell-cracked section of the main chamber's roof. The blast kills every man inside. The remainder of the position's defenders, fewer than 50 men left, withdraw in good order to the support line.
Throughout these attacks, the Soviet infantry advances in waves. Finnish fire mows down hundreds in the first waves, so that those pressing forward from behind were forced to climb over rows of dead and dying comrades. As each successive attack dashed itself to pieces, the rows of dead were closer and closer to Finnish lines, until the horror of hand-to-hand combat would erupt. The Soviets have factored these casualties into the equation. There are always more men, but the Finns have no replacements.
By February 13th, the Finnish counterattack on the Lada sector comes, but Mannerheim can only spare part of his reserve 5th Division, because other sectors are also in crisis. The counterattack is too weak. The Soviets widen the Lada salient on the 14th, putting pressure on Suma from the rear. The Finns begin a withdrawal from Suma, carefully, quietly, and without alerting the Soviets. On February 15th, a massive Soviet attack on the Suma position finds no defenders. When Stalin is told that Suma has fallen, he reportedly refuses to believe it until an eyewitness confirms personally that he has seen the red flag flying. Suma held for 70 days, but now it is forced to be abandoned.
At 4 a.m. on February 15th, Field Marshal Mannerheim orders a general retreat of Finnish II Corps to the intermediate defensive line, the V line, roughly 12 miles behind the Mannerheim line. It is the decisive moment of the Winter War. Finland has not surrendered. It has a new defense position, but the Mannerheim line was its strongest card, and that card is now just gone. The Finnish government has already reached the same conclusion. On February 12th, it formally authorized the government to seek peace terms with Moscow.
There is one Finnish success in the same period that should be mentioned. On February 16th, Finnish troops of the 9th Division wipe out the surrounded Soviet Dolan Ski Brigade near Kumo, a town in central Finland, about 300 miles north of Helsinki, where a Soviet force has been encircled and eliminated in Mati fashion. Even as the main front retreats, Finnish forces are still destroying entire Soviet brigades in the wilderness. The war is not over, Finland is not defeated, but the terms it will negotiate from this position are going to be much harsher than anything offered in October.
February 12th, on the Firth of Clyde, the estuary of the River Clyde, on Scotland's western coast that opens toward the North Atlantic, roughly 20 miles southwest of Glasgow. HMS Gleaner, a small minesweeper, locates German submarine U-33 on a mine-laying operation at 2:50 in the morning. Depth charges are dropped. U-33 is badly damaged and forced to surface just after 5 a.m. She begins to sink immediately. Of her crew of 42, 25 men die, including her commander. 17 survived. They are pulled from the water and the survivors are brought aboard Gleaner.
Before the boat was abandoned, the U-boat's secret Enigma rotors were distributed amongst a few of the crew, who were instructed to release them into the sea to avoid capture. The rotors are the replaceable wheels at the heart of the Enigma cipher machine, the components that determine the encryption setting. These sailors were instructed to drop them into the sea rather than to let them reach British hands. But in the chaos of trying to escape the sinking submarine, the sailors were too busy and failed to dispose of these rotors. The rotors are removed from the prisoners, placed in a sealed package, and sent to Bletchley Park, where Alan Turing and other codebreakers can examine them. They are among the first physical naval Enigma components recovered by the British, and they become another valuable piece of the puzzle that the codebreakers are trying to solve.
During this week, and formally on February 15th, Major General Erwin Rommel assumes command of the 7th Panzer Division. He had previously been commander of Hitler's personal escort battalion during the Polish campaign. Close to power, but not quite in it. Now he has tanks under his command. He has about 3 months to learn how to use them at scale before the invasion of France, and he will use those 3 months well. The 7th Panzer Division under Rommel will advance so fast during the French campaign that it becomes known as the Ghost Division. German High Command repeatedly loses track of where it is because it has outrun the lines on the map.
On February 11th, in Montreal, John Buchan, Lord Tweedsmuir, the 15th Governor General of Canada, dies in hospital following surgery for a stroke. He is 64 years old. Most people know him as the author of the book The 39 Steps, an espionage thriller that was published in 1915 that Alfred Hitchcock made into a famous film in 1935. The irony of his death this week is pretty pointed. The man who wrote one of the defining stories of wartime espionage and intelligence dies in the same week that Enigma rotors are being rushed to Bletchley Park, and a German spy network in America is being dismantled by a man who walked into the consulate and offered to switch sides. Real espionage has caught up to the fiction, but the author doesn't live to see it. February 14th, in Mayen, Germany, a small German town in the Eifel Hills of western Germany, about 20 miles southwest of Koblenz, not far from the Belgian border. German Army Group A is conducting a war game to test General von Manstein's proposed invasion plan, the Ardennes variant that sends the main armored thrust through the impassable, in quotes, forest, rather than through Belgium as the original plan called for.
The key question of the war game is the Meuse River crossing. The Meuse runs north through Belgium and France, roughly parallel to the Belgium-German border, forming a natural obstacle that any force coming through the Ardennes would have to cross before breaking out into open country toward the English Channel. The question is, can armored units cross the defended river on their own without waiting for infantry to come up and support them? Well, General Halder, the Army Chief of Staff, believes that they cannot. He thinks panzer forces need infantry support before attempting a major river crossing, and that without it, the operation risks catastrophic failure.
General Heinz Guderian, who commands one of the armored corps that would make the crossing, disagrees. Guderian is Germany's foremost theorist of armored warfare, a man who has spent his career arguing that tanks used en masse and at speed can do things that conventional military thinking considers impossible. He concludes from the war game that the Meuse can be crossed on panzer initiative alone, without waiting for the infantry, and that the speed of that crossing will be decisive before the Allies can react.
The debate is never fully resolved at Mayen. The agreement they reach is very German in its pragmatism. Panzer commanders will be authorized to attempt the Meuse crossing on their own initiative. If they fail, Armored Group A will revert to the infantry option. It is not a ringing endorsement of Guderian's position, but it gives him the authorization he needs. In May, when the time comes, Guderian will cross the Meuse on his own initiative. He will be ordered to stop 3 times by his own commanders, convinced that a successful crossing is impossible. The debate that starts at Mayen will be settled on a riverbank in France 3 months later.
Now to the main story of the episode. We've spoken somewhat of the Altmark. The Altmark was the supply ship for the Admiral Graf Spee, the pocket battleship that was hunted across the South Atlantic, fought a 3-cruiser squadron, and was scheduled in the River Plate in December. The Altmark had been carrying the prisoners taken from the 9 ships the Graf Spee sank, 299 British merchant sailors, locked in cargo holds that had been hastily converted into prison cells. After the Graf Spee scuttling, the Altmark planned to transfer those prisoners to Germany via the most circuitous route possible in order to avoid the Royal Navy. They traveled south around the Cape of Good Hope, then north along the African coast, then east through the Denmark Strait between Greenland and Iceland, and finally south along the Norwegian coast towards Germany.
On February 14th, an RAF Lockheed Hudson patrol aircraft of No. 220 Squadron spots the Altmark in Norwegian waters. 2 British destroyers are dispatched and find her in the open sea, but the Altmark immediately seeks refuge inside Norwegian territorial waters, and the Norwegian government tells the British that their warships cannot follow. Norwegian naval vessels escort the Altmark, and Norwegian officers board and search the ship. The captain of the Altmark, Heinrich Dow, tells the Norwegians that there are no prisoners aboard. The Norwegians made cursory checks, but they don't find any prisoners. The prisoners had been forced below and told to stay silent, but they didn't listen. The British prisoners, desperate to be heard, began shouting, pounding on the bulkheads, and banging whatever they could find. Captain Dow ordered his crew to suppress the disturbance with fire hoses. Hoses were thrust through the hatch openings, and high-pressure streams of icy water flooded the holds, drenching the men and turning the already foul space into a freezing, oil-slicked nightmare. The stench became overpowering. Electricity was cut off, plunging the prisoners into total darkness. They huddled together, shivering. As punishment, Dow reduced their rations the next day to nothing but just bread and water. The British destroyers stand off, frustrated as they can do nothing. Back in England, Winston Churchill is informed of these developments.
Churchill orders HMS Cossack, a modern destroyer commanded by Captain Philip Vian, to intercept. On the evening of February 16th, Cossack finds the Altmark sheltering in Using Fjord, a narrow fjord on Norway's southwestern coast, roughly 80 miles from Stavanger. The fjord is surrounded by rocky walls, partially iced, and approximately 2 miles long. Cossack follows the Altmark into the fjord. A Norwegian gunboat commands Cossack to stop. Vian explains his orders, warns that British subjects are believed to be aboard the Altmark, and asks the Norwegian vessel to escort both ships out. The Norwegians refuse.
Churchill's authorization is received. Cossack ignores the Norwegian commands and goes alongside the Altmark. But the ice is too thick for the ship's boats to be lowered. They would be crushed. As the two ships scrape together, the Altmark makes 2 attempts to ram the Cossack. Both fail. The Altmark runs aground in the attempt. Royal Navy men leap across the Cossack to the deck of the Altmark. The boarding party is armed with rifles and fixed bayonets. They also carry cutlasses, actual swords, the short naval swords that have not been used in combat by the Royal Navy in living memory. 4 German crewmen are killed in the fighting on deck and on the ice. 7 Germans die in total.
Below decks, one of the prisoners describes what happens next. Quote, "It was a hit-and-run affair, along the decks and round corners, more of a rat hunt than anything. You can imagine our joy when we heard English voices shouting down at us." End quote. The shout that goes down into the hold has become one of the most iconic lines of the early war. Quote, "The Navy's here!" End quote. 299 British merchant sailors, men who have been locked in cargo holds for weeks or months, kept silent with fire hoses, told their governments had forgotten them, come up into the cold Norwegian night and onto HMS Cossack.
The diplomatic aftermath is immediate. Norway formally protests the violation of its territorial waters. Britain replies that Norway violated international law by failing to search the Altmark and by allowing Germany to transport British prisoners through neutral waters. Both claims are defensible. The Norwegian protest is noted and not acted upon. Captain Vian receives the Distinguished Service Order. Churchill receives enormous public approval. This is the first clear, unambiguous British success story since the sinking of the Grash Bay 2 months ago, and it involves bayonets and cutlasses, which is the kind of story Britain, in February 1940, desperately needs.
The less visible consequence is the one that matters more strategically. German military planners, watching what Britain just did, entering neutral Norwegian waters in direct violation of Norwegian sovereignty, boarding a German vessel and killing crew. They conclude that Britain is actively preparing operations in Norwegian waters. This reinforces every argument that the German Navy has been making for months about the strategic necessity of invading Norway before Britain can establish itself there. The Altmark incident accelerates German planning for Operation Weserübung. The scheduled date of the Norwegian invasion is April 9th. Britain's dramatic rescue of 299 sailors contributes to the death of Norwegian independence.
So, Germany and the Soviet Union signed a trade agreement that includes extensive naval technical information. The Mannerheim line is breached after 70 days of heroic defense. Finland authorizes its government to seek peace. Enigma rotors are pulled from a sinking submarine and rushed to Bletchley Park. Rommel gets his first tanks. Guderian concludes that he can cross the Meuse alone and is given conditional authority to try. 299 British prisoners here, the Navy's here, in a Norwegian ford and come up into the February dark. And Norway flies a protest that nobody acts on, while Germany concludes that Britain must be stopped from doing this again, in Norwegian waters, at scale, permanently.
Next episode, the Winter War enters its final days and Finland negotiates the terms of a peace that costs it dearly, but saves the country. Thanks for joining us for episode 22 of History Date Night. We'll see you next time.
See you then!